The media shows you missiles. They will feature the new SM-2 Block 3CYU interceptor and quote developers of systems like the Iron Dome, who boast of a production line of surprises. This is a managed distraction. The objective is to fixate your attention on kinetic defense. A symmetric game, established powers are mathematically guaranteed to lose. The kinetic cost of intercepting an infinite swarm of low-cost projectiles is designed to create a national solvency crisis. The primary strategic vector is not an explosion. It is silence. While you watch the sky, the decisive battle space is the deep ocean and low Earth orbit. Analysts at CSIS confirm the blueprint. The critical vulnerability of a modern state is not its military hardware, but the data infrastructure that allows it to function. Undersea fiber optic cables, GPS, and imaging satellites. These are the targets. The result is the blind Leviathan, a nation-state with unparalleled conventional military superiority rendered inert. Its aircraft carriers are adrift, unable to receive targeting data. Its markets are frozen, unable to clear swift transactions. The Leviathan is alive, powerful, and thrashing, but it is disconnected from its nervous system. It cannot see, it cannot coordinate, it cannot transact. This state of induced paralysis triggers the escalation inversion. A blinded power cannot afford attrition. It cannot assess damage or confirm kills. Its only solvent protocol is a launch-on warning, preemptive strike against the perceived source of the attack. Weakness, the low-cost ability to sever data flow, does not deter a catastrophic response. It provokes it. This is the systemic pathway to total war. The motive is not ideology. It is solvency. A state's first obligation is to remain financially viable. A conventional symmetric war is the fastest vector to national bankruptcy. When a state's leadership calculates that it cannot win a prolonged war of attrition against a superior economic and military power, it faces a solvency crisis. The war in Ukraine serves as the blueprint. Analysts at RUSI confirm that for Russia, the conflict rapidly evolved from a geopolitical objective into a domestic liability. The kinetic cost of symmetric engagement, losing tanks, aircraft, and trained personnel, imposes unsustainable pressure on the national budget. An unpopular war is an economic black hole. This financial death spiral forces a pivot. It is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty. The state must abandon the losing game of symmetric warfare and adopt asymmetric protocols. Why spend $1 billion on a new destroyer when you can achieve greater strategic disruption for a fraction of the cost? Weakness, therefore, ceases to be a deterrent. It becomes the primary accelerant for asymmetry. The inability to compete on conventional terms provides the strategic and economic justification to attack an adversary's systemic vulnerabilities, their economic choke points, their political stability, their reliance on complex high-cost defensive systems like the SM-2 interceptor, which can be exhausted by low-cost swarms. This is the solvency crisis triggering the escalation inversion. The central vulnerability is not strategic, it is fiscal. A systemic solvency crisis engineered by an inverted cost curve. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, document the core equation. A $5 million main battle tank is rendered combat ineffective by a $500 FPV drone. This is not a balanced exchange. It is a 10,000 to 1 kinetic cost disparity. For every high-value asset deployed, the adversary can launch thousands of credible threats. The defender's treasury is bled dry simply by maintaining a defensive posture. This economic reality is the engine of the democratization of violence, a paradigm where lethal, precision strike capability is no longer a state monopoly. It is a commodity. The mathematical certainty is that a defensive war of attrition is unwinnable. The only solvent protocol becomes preemptive asset liquidation of the threat's manufacturing and launch infrastructure. The battlefield is no longer a distant line in the sand. It is a distributed network of strategically cultivated vacuums. These are the gray zones, ungoverned territories, and failed states deliberately maintained as laboratories for asymmetric warfare. CSIS reports identify these zones not as humanitarian crises, but as forward operating bases for non-attributable kinetic attacks. Consider the official U.S. travel warning for Somalia, coinciding with the termination of temporary protected status. This is not a bureaucratic footnote. It is the formal designation of a territory as a non-viable entity. For strategic planners, this translates to a permissive environment, a proxy laboratory, where an adversary can stage and test low-cost, high-impact weapon systems with zero accountability. This kinetic vector operates in parallel with an economic one. While you watch the failed state, the solvency attack is happening in the supply chain. The Reliance Lithium episode in India is the blueprint. A critical dependency on Chinese battery technology creates a non-military choke point. One policy change in Beijing can neutralize India's entire energy and defense manufacturing capacity. This is economic siege warfare, staged from a boardroom, not a battlefield. The conventional response is a mathematical trap. The U.S. Navy showcases the new SM-2 Block through IC interceptor, a multi-million-dollar asset designed to destroy a $1,000 drone. Meanwhile, adversaries, as confirmed by the founder of Israel's Iron Dome, have a production line of surprises. For the next war, this is a kinetic cost-exchange ratio that guarantees bankruptcy. The defender's solvency is the primary target. This asymmetric cost burden forces the escalation inversion. When a swarm attack is launched from a gray zone like Somalia, the solvent response is not to fire $1 billion worth of interceptors. The protocol, according to RUSI analysis, is to bypass the proxy. It is to trace the vector to its state sponsor and apply overwhelming, preemptive force directly to the source. A minor attack from a failed state becomes the trigger for a launch-on-warning strike against a peer competitor. This is the systemic pathway to total war. The doctrine is designated launch-on-warning. It is a Cold War protocol to solve a solvency crisis. If an adversary's first strike destroys your missiles in their silos, your ability to retaliate is zero. You become insolvent. The solution is a systemic hair trigger. Upon confirmed detection of inbound kinetic vectors, you launch your own arsenal before impact. You do not wait for detonation. You do not wait for clarification. Now, inject the asymmetric accelerant, a targeted cyber attack. As RUSI reports confirm, an adversary does not need to spoof 1,000 incoming missiles. They only need to blind you. Your early warning satellite network and ground-based radar are neutralized, not with explosives, but with code. The data feeds stop. The screens go dark. This is the fog of digital war. The commander now confronts a binary choice, a mathematical certainty of failure. The absence of data is not a neutral state. It is an active threat signal. Is the sensory deprivation a system error, or is it a curtain raiser for a decapitation strike already minutes away? Waiting for clarity means betting national survival on the hope it's a glitch. The protocol, however, demands a solvent response to existential risk: launch. The fear of kinetic disarmament forces the launch. This is the ultimate expression of the escalation inversion. Your multi-trillion-dollar nuclear triad is not defeated by an equivalent force, but checkmated by a low-cost, denial-of-service attack. Your strength, your adherence to protocol, becomes the very vector of your destruction. The weakness of blindness doesn't deter. It provokes a catastrophic, preemptive response, creating a systemic pathway to total war. The term for a non-declaratory act of strategic aggression is a calibration shot. It is not designed to destroy, but to measure. It probes a nation's response time, political will, and defensive solvency. The objective is to impose maximum economic cost for minimum kinetic investment, confirming the mathematical liability of conventional defenses. The blueprint for this vector is public record. CSIS analysis of the Reliance Lithium episode confirms that supply chains are now weaponized fronts. The denial of battery technology to India was a non-kinetic test of systemic leverage. This low-cost economic pressure stands in stark contrast to the high-cost defensive posture of established powers, exemplified by assets like the new SM-2 Block 3C CU interceptor. One is a scalpel, the other is a shield that costs billions to hold up. This is not an isolated risk. The industrialization of asymmetric tools is accelerating. The architect of Iron Dome confirmed a production line of surprises for the next war. This signals a systemic shift from bespoke weapons to mass-produced, low-cost vectors capable of overwhelming high-cost defenses. The calibration shot is the market entry strategy for these new products. The calibration forecast. Within 12 months, a Tier 1 Indian port or its integrated data infrastructure will experience a 72-hour unexplained blackout. The vector will be a dormant, supply chain embedded logic bomb targeting industrial control systems. It will be attribution impossible, publicly attributed to legacy system failure. The event is not an attack. It is a price signal, designed to prove the target's defensive architecture is insolvent and provoke the escalation inversion.